Good morning, everyone. It's Peter Crewe-Brown here. Welcome to another episode of the Mind Over Matters podcast with Peter Crewe-Brown. The topic for today is managing the uncomfortable with Dee Coxon, who is the founder of menopause, a non-intrusive, non-intimate online training tool that makes it easier for organizations to create a menopause-friendly workplace. In other words, explains Dee, menopause is a workplace solution, not a medical diagnosis. So just briefly about our guest for today, a little bit more about Dee. Having navigated an early menopause, Dee has first-hand experience of the journey. Being self-employed, she was able to manage her symptoms and take control of her professional life in a way that worked for her. It was only in talking to other women at networking events that she realized it wasn't the same for them and for those who were contracted to organizations and their obligations. Their journey was entirely different and not for the better. With a master's degree in workplace management, Dee put on her research hat and set out to discover why these women weren't being supported at work. So, a bit more about today's podcast. From her research, Dee discovered that there was a huge disconnect between menopause training for women and menopause training for managers. And because they are two entirely different things, being managed as one, this is where the problem starts. This means that in a workplace environment, managers are just as unsupported as those they are required to support. This is obviously a big problem. The result being a lose-lose situation, and one that Dee was determined to remedy. This will be the focus of the podcast discussion today. So Dee, if you wouldn't mind, please share with the audience what makes you tick and who in the community do you serve?
Hello, Peter. It's great to be here. At the moment, Peter, the honest answer to what makes me tick is my focus has shifted a little bit. And my day-to-day ticking over is more focused on getting through this pandemic, which has changed so many things. And where before the focus was very much on the business, the focus is more on family, safety. And there's a line from an old film, Gone with the Wind, that says, tomorrow is another day. And I just keep saying that to myself to get through it, because there are so many changes at home, at work, outside in the business. There have been big changes for everyone. Offices have closed, as we all know, agendas have changed, priorities have changed. And in terms of the work I do, with menopause training. In England, we were about 3 years ahead of the rest of the Western world in terms of what we'd managed to achieve. And that sort of froze for a while through this pandemic, and it dropped down on the list of priorities while people were fighting fires and doing what they had to do. But now that we're coming out of lockdown and things are getting bit more back to normal, then the focus is refocusing back onto the menopause, not least because now that we've been through the pandemic and there's so much around mental health and well-being, because employees are looking to their leaders to help them more with their mental and financial health, then menopause training very much comes into that, because it ticks all of the mental health boxes, and it does have a huge financial impact as well, not only for the employee but for the business. So I'm very hopeful that because employees are looking for this, organizations will add menopause training into their box of training tools, as it were, going forward. So that's my main focus, to make sure that that stays up there.
So if anything, the work you do has become more relevant since COVID.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe not in an obvious way,
yeah,
but because mental health is so much on the agenda now,
yeah,
and it's, it's not just being looked at as an umbrella now. We're looking at the different areas of mental health that are being affected. And of
yeah.
course, menopause, it impacts both mental and physical health. So there's a need to concentrate on that area.
Okay. And then I think who in the community you serve is fairly obvious. It's obviously women of a certain age.
Well, not exactly, Peter. And it's great that you've said that, because that's a misconception about what I do. Because while ultimately my work does support women going through the menopause, the people I work with are the managers, the
Okay.
ones who need and deserve the training so that they can support those women. So indirectly, I support those women, but directly, I support managers.
Okay.
Most of
And those
on the,
managers could be of any gender.
oh, absolutely, and any
Okay.
age.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for clearing up my misconception there. So, Dee, having, I guess, got through the introductions, I'd really like to dig into the questions that we've discussed in the lead up to this session. The first question is, I know that there are many approaches to the subject of managing menopause in the workplace. What's your specific approach?
Okay, so in my case, I make it easy for people managers at every level to understand the impact of menopause on the workplace, the business, and its people without the intrusion and the intimate detail and complex biology of menopause. And by teaching them how to provide the right support to the right people in the right context at the right time, then that gives them the tools and confidence where they can enhance company reputation, enhance staff retention, employee well-being, and it's all done online through my exclusive program. There's a reason it's online, and we'll get to that in your next questions.
Sure. Excellent. No, I really appreciate that. I guess the next question is many people think they are in control of managing menopause in the workplace. How do you approach the delicate subject that when you know that it needs discussion?
Okay, so the first thing I do right out the gate is make sure that people know that there is not going to be a conversation around the female form or about intimate, uncomfortable biology lessons. And once they know that, they become more open to the conversation, bearing in mind the people I speak to about this are not the women going through the menopause. It's usually a decision maker who I'm talking to on behalf of the company. And more often than not, that decision maker isn't going through the menopause, therefore it's not even on their radar. So they have an assumption that, oh my God, this is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be very detailed. And, so they're sort of closed off to it. So you've got to get in the door there anyway. And I do that by letting them know there's nothing uncomfortable coming their way. And once I remove that fear and dread, you've got a conversation going then.
Yeah.
And the reason I said to you earlier, I do this online is because what I discovered through my research is that managers, they don't want training that is in a group session, that is one-to-one, or that they're training with their colleagues, or heaven forbid, training with the women who are going through the menopause. Because the truth is, Peter, I hear people saying all the time, we need to get to a place where talking about menopause is the norm, okay? Talking about menopause is never going to be the norm unless you're the woman going through it. And the reason for that is it's uncomfortable, it's highly complex, and it's very personal, So I remove the myths that, I don't browbeat them and say, yeah, we are going to talk about all the symptoms and we are going to talk about all the horrors because you need to know this. They don't need to know that.
Yeah.
What they need to know is how their people are impacted and how they can help them. So mainly, I settle everything down by letting them know it's not going to be detailed and personal.
Okay. Yeah. Obviously, that's of great comfort to the people that you're working with. I guess the
Yes.
thing that's interesting to me, given that this is not an area that I guess I have a great knowledge in, what percentage of a typical workforce would be impacted by, I guess, menopause at a specific time? I mean, given obviously it's something that affects women and not men, and typically affects women, I guess, at a certain age.
Yeah.
Is it a fairly big proportion of a workforce at any point in time?
It's huge. I mean, 1 in 8 women in the workforce are going through the menopause.
One in eight.
1 in 8,
Oh,
yeah. And
that's substantial, isn't it? That's like
yeah,
15%
yeah.
plus. Yeah.
That's it. And 1 in 4 will experience a very bad menopause transition. You know, lots of women sail through it, you know, without any interruption to their life. But
Yeah.
many more, you don't have that luxury of getting through it unscathed. So
Yeah.
yeah, it has a huge impact. And when you know, the size of the female workforce is absolutely huge. The biggest demographic in the UK, in the United States, is that's growing is working women who are going through the menopause age. There are more women at work at 50 than in any other demographic in the workplace. So it's a big number.
And I would suggest growing all the time as a percentage.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing is, you know, it's a natural phenomenon. It's not going anywhere. So to avoid it, you're not doing any good for your organization. The thing is to address it. And I do have massive sympathy for organizations and for managers, because you know, we have an old outdated narrative where people think, you know, it's a very unpleasant conversation, and to make it work and to find remedies and solutions for the workplace, you have to go through all of this intimacy. And you really, there's no need to do that. That doesn't serve a manager. They don't need to know that detail. What they need to know is, what's your problem? How is it affecting you at work? How can I help you?
Yeah. And I guess people often get bogged down in the detail. And as you say, they don't need the detail. They just need to know how to address the challenges as they come up.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now that's really interesting. The third question then is, what are the biggest challenges in dealing with menopause in the workplace that that your clients have?
The biggest challenge, and you know, I hate to say this, Peter, but it's absolutely true. The biggest challenge is there is a code of silence among women, okay? And the reason there is a code of silence is because there's a lot of shame attached to it, and because again, getting back to this outdated narrative, women think, and they're often right, okay, that you know, if someone flags up that they're going through menopause, then everyone else in the workplace, especially managers and leaders, there is an assumption that this is an aging person, okay,
Yeah.
and she
Yeah.
may be overlooked for promotion. She may be seen as less than. She may not be given the tasks that she can, you know, she can normally rise to those challenges, but people, without asking her, can remove some of those tasks based on an assumption, you know, she's not going to be doing very well, and you know, let's just keep her out of the picture while this is going on. And no woman wants to be perceived as that. And while some women are very badly impacted at work and do lose some of the competencies and competence for a time, if that does happen to them, it's temporary. And so what they need is help and support to get through that. But the other part of that challenge is, these same women who want the help and support and who are keeping a silence, they're asking the question, why is there no support in place for me at work? Well, how is a manager or an organization expected to know what you need if you don't tell them what you need? You know, so
Yes.
you can see it's a dilemma, okay?
Yeah.
And so for me, the answer to that for an organization is, the obvious answer, because the training that's available is so limited, is they need to go to someone who experienced this, who
Yeah.
knows how it impacts and how you can help with that. Because one of the other challenges is, people think menopause training that immediately associated with women. So there's wonderful training out there for women who are going through the menopause, training and education, but that's not what a manager needs, okay? So the first thing for an organization is to identify which type of menopause training they need, because menopause training for women won't help a manager, okay?
Yeah.
If you give the women the education and training they need to take care of themselves and to improve their lives, But if you also give the managers the training that they need to understand what's going on, then they can come together and then they can form a menopause policy that works for the managers and for the women. But the one thing to get clear on is that both groups do not require the same training. And the problem we have is they're all getting the same training, more or less. You know,
Yeah.
you have a menopause program for women, and an organization will say, oh, do you do it for the workplace? And they'll say, yes, we do. And all they do is bring that same menopause training for women into the workplace. It's not a different type of training. So you're just on a treadmill, not really getting any further forward.
Okay.
And the worst part of that is, and again, in their defense, managers are very reluctant to do the training. They don't want menopause training for women because it's uncomfortable and it's not very nice. So we have to find a better way to give them the education and support that they need, and to get the message out there that it's not the same as female menopause training. It's paramount that we keep that up there and let them know there is a difference.
Yeah. And do you find that discomfort, which might have existed earlier on and which I think you're saying is now disappearing, that's really changing people's perspective and allowing people to feel less discriminated against if they, are in fact in that demographic?
I think in fairness, it certainly in this country, a lot of the huge organisations, for example, our police forces, our
Yes.
fire services, big companies like that, they are leading the pack in terms of what they're bringing into the workplace. But, they are big organisations. When you think about the smaller to mid-size, we're very lacking there. And of course, there are many big organisations, especially where the directors are all middle-aged men,
Yes.
that were failing miserably at it. Again, I can understand it's the outdated narrative, it's the discomfort, but we're at a stage now where they've got to open their eyes to this because women are demanding more help with this, and they don't want help with bells and whistles. They want very discreet, very private help. So it's not as though they're shining a light on their organizations where they have to do something really, really uncomfortable. It's normally at the top level where there's an assumption it's going to be uncomfortable. So we'll put that at the bottom of the priority pile and we'll deal with it when we have to,
Yeah.
where what would be wonderful is for them to get on it and deal with it now. And
Yeah.
instead of waiting till the wheels come off, don't let the wheels come off. Deal with it. Be surprised and delighted by how easy it is.
Yeah.
And then you've done it. And then, because, a menopause policy for a workplace is not a one size fits all. It depends what your workplace is. But once you have a roadmap into what to do, you can tweak that for your organization and make it to you.
Yeah. And I guess, to your point earlier, the more organizations talk about this and the more it becomes mainstream, I guess the more comfortable managers become, and the less people who are going through it will be discriminated against.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, if you consider if women learn everything they need to know about themselves, and then the managers learn all about how these women are being impacted. And of course, very importantly, Peter, it's not just the women who are impacted. People are affected by someone else's menopause, and you can be in a workplace where if you have a woman, God bless her, who's going through really bad symptoms, that can become a very toxic workplace.
Yes.
Because especially if you're affected by it mentally, often you lose your filter, and where you would ordinarily be very much aware of social norms, etc., you can become rude, bad-tempered, agitated, and for your colleagues, if they've had no explanation or they have no understanding, they all become very uncomfortable, and productivity decreases and staff morale decreases because you've got this person who is all over the place, and really affecting. And of course, men are badly affected as well, because if they have a wife or partner who's going through the menopause, and again, if she's having an extremely difficult time, men can be very distracted, worrying about her, ringing home to see if she's okay, dreading going home because, things are not the same. Sometimes when when women are just simply exhausted and don't know what's happening to them. You know, they may not want to cook at home, they may not want to do the things they normally do at home, they're not connecting with their children, they just can't be bothered with it. So it isn't a women's issue, and that's a big mistake. Yes, the symptoms fall onto the women and they are mainly impacted, but the fallout from that can be absolutely massive.
Yeah.
And the sad thing around that is, when there's a massive fallout going on in the workplace, the majority of people don't know what's happening. They just think this person's turned nasty. And so it leads to a very uncomfortable workplace.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, how the discussions and the narrative are happening and hopefully improving is probably not totally different with how the whole, I guess, having maternal and paternal leave in the workplace has played out over the last 20 to 30 years, where, you know, it's now commonplace and fathers are more involved in rearing the children. There's more awareness of it, and it's changed the whole workplace. And one would hope over time, as you say, with the increasing percentage of women who are impacted by menopause increasing, that awareness will happen, you know, across all things that impact women more specifically than men. And, you know, the workforce will become more tolerant of people who have different, you know, afflictions or challenges on account of their gender.
Yeah. And of course, what you've got to remember is for an awful lot of these women who are going through menopause, they're often at a stage of their career where they're at the top of the game. You know, they're often directors and leaders themselves. And so because it's so closed off, especially when you're at high level, the amount of women who choose to leave work because there's no support in place for them, you know, we're losing our top talent, you know, just like water running down a drain. And so we have to save that, because even though a woman may have some dreadful challenges and may have some bad experiences at work because of the menopause, the one guarantee is she will come back from that. Can't guarantee what day and what time, but she will come to that with all her skills and all her fabulousness and all her talent. So what her employers need to do is, you know, make sure there's the support there for that transition, whether that needs to be some time off, whether that needs to be some flexibility in the workplace, whether that means that this director won't do any big pitching or any big presentations for the company during this period, because, you know, if she has brain fog or freezes for the moment, or complete memory lapse, then, you know, instead of worrying about that happening in the boardroom, then maybe take some of that pressure off that person for that time, so those embarrassing experiences don't happen for the woman and for the organization.
Yeah, and I think a point that I took from what you've just said is that a lot of the people who are going through this phase are at the top of their game, and the workforce simply can't afford not to have them actively participating in the workforce.
Of course, and when you think about it, at the last count, Peter, I think my information, the latest data I have is from 2018. But when you think about to recruit someone at that level, if you've lost them, you're looking at a minimum of £30,000 to bring someone else on board. And including the time factor, depending on where that person was in the organization, you know, to bring them up to that level. So, you know, rather than incur costs of £30,000 every time, get some support in place so that you don't lose this fabulous talent, and that she is supported through it privately and discreetly, knowing that her job is still there, because the guarantee is she will come through the other side.
Yeah. And look, I think unfortunately a lot of these changes are brought about by, I guess, regulations. You know, I find, you know, in big organizations in Australia, there's a lot of gender balancing going on in boards, because, you know, there's a lot of, I guess, old practices in terms of, as you said, you know, male-dominated boards. And as long as you're not including, you know, all elements of the workforce equitably, you're going to have these situations. And, you know, I think everyone is cheering along for this gender balancing to happen, so that all these people have the same opportunity to participate in the workforce.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, moving on to the fourth question, Dee, What benefits have you seen for clients who have adopted your online training tool?
Well, it gives them a sound level of knowledge without them having to be experts. You know, people think to deal with menopause, you have to be a medical expert or a clinical expert. You don't. It removes the embarrassment and the discomfort for them. But the most important benefit, which is intentional on my part, is that I go back to this again, Peter, but you know, you've got the menopause training for women and you've got the menopause training for managers. And through menopause, you know, they meet in the middle so that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet, you know, and that is the big benefit. Yeah.
So the course that you offer, is that primarily a training? Is it educational, or is it a communication sort of process?
It's training and it's education and it's information. Okay, I do it in a way which is all born from my research. The whole thing is pre-recorded. Okay, because what managers have said is, you know, don't put me in a room with other people. Don't put me in a room with the women I'm going to work with every day, because I can't unsee what I've seen. I can't unhear what I've heard. That's because they've got this preconception that it's going to be awful, you know. Because the thing is, it's so important to look at it from a manager's point of view. Why put a manager, male or female, in an uncomfortable position? They're never going to learn if they're feeling uncomfortable. They're not going to absorb the information. Okay, so it's information based, and it's a transformational program as well, which transforms how they do things in the workforce. So it's you know, you access it online. It's on demand. It's 2 hour. And they are happily, you know, wherever is their happy place, they're behind their laptop or whatever device they choose, and they do the course from there. So they're not in a training room, you know, they're not with other people, they're removed from that discomfort. So it's on-demand training, and there's no, you know, I don't go online and have a chat with them. It's all pre-done. So they download.
So it's completely private.
Yeah, completely private. And because it's a fact, Peter, that, you know, these managers, they want stealth mode when they're doing this. And I support them in that, because wouldn't you rather deliver training in the way that they want than force them into something that they don't want, won't enjoy? And by that, it follows naturally that they won't absorb that information. But if they get into it and then they say it's not the horror story that they thought it was going to be, and they all come up, you know, the men mainly contact me and go, Dee, I had no idea that this was, what was it about? This is what it was about. And I feel so much more comfortable now. I regret that I haven't done anything about it earlier. I assumed it was going to be medical, you know, and so they're always very grateful and very relieved, I have to say, Peter, that it's not what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I'm sure. You know, being a guy myself, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions about concerning, you know, subjects like this. And I'm sure that, as you say, for many, it's a great relief that there's a tool that allows people to get the necessary education they need.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to add to that as well, Peter. More importantly, what I've managed to do is, because it's such a complex and huge issue, okay, most of which is not required by managers in order for them to support their people at work, okay? But I've managed to distill it all down in a way that what could have been an incredibly difficult conversation, or one that people assume is going to be difficult, that it boils down to this, that a woman going through the menopause, once menopause training has been completed, they can have, the manager and the employee can have a very simple conversation. For example, you have a woman say to a manager, I have a menopause related problem that's making me late for work every morning. I need some help with this. How can you help me? You know, and the manager can say, what is it you want help with? And she can say, would it be possible to have some flexibility with what time I arrive at work every morning? That's as big as the conversation needs to be to get the ball rolling. And it can be left at that for the manager to say, can I come back to you tomorrow? Let me look at what hours you're looking at, or what kind of flexibility you need. Let me see if I can work around that. That's not a difficult conversation. There's no conversation. symptoms or anything like that. And so, but it's like everything else, Peter, to get it down to that small, workable situation, you have to sift out all of the excess. And that's what so they're working on a need to know basis.
No, that makes perfect sense. Dee, just moving on to the fifth of our questions. Do you have any quick tips or takeaways that the audience could implement straight after the show? Are there any things, that managers or people who work in organizations where they feel this is not being done in a way that's sensitive, can go about changing that?
Well, the first thing I would do, Peter, is to say if your listeners want to go to my website, which is menopause.com, on the front
could you
page,
just
on the
spell that for the audience?
Yes, it's menopause.com, menopause.com. And on the homepage there's a downloadable free report on the impact of menopause on the workplace, how much it's costing the workplace, and what you can do about that. And so that's free, and that's available now. So I recommend that you do that. And I further recommend that if they're not the decision maker, but they want something done about this at work, then share it with the decision maker. Let them know that this is available.
And I'm assuming the obvious approach is this applies equally to women in all countries. It's not like many areas of, of the work we do where the approach is different in different countries. I mean, your course, for example, or your tool applies equally to women in any country.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a tool that can be worldwide. I would add to that, Peter, that in other parts of the world, not as much forward movement has been achieved yet. So maybe they wouldn't be so open to it, But certainly in the Western world, it's moving ahead in leaps and bounds. And, with menopause, I want to keep them going in the right direction. And while I'm a huge advocate of menopause training and education for women, I'm equally an advocate of this for managers, because we can't keep browbeating managers for not giving women support when managers are not being supported themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And as you say, a lot of these managers wouldn't have the knowledge to be able to provide for their staff in a meaningful way on a subject that they might not be familiar with or have personal experience with.
Exactly. And why would they, if you think about their day-to-day life as a manager, Peter, where would menopause be on their radar, on their universe, just wouldn't, unless it's something that's brought to them, or unless, they're aware there's a menopause problem. But, let's not leave these managers hanging where they're in a position where they go, good God, I know there's a problem with menopause. I don't know how to help her. I don't know what to do. And so, but these women need support at the point of need. They haven't got time to wait until a company takes 6 or 12 months to put something together, because they're going through a crisis now, and they need that support now.
No, that makes perfect sense. Dee, another thing, and we've partly covered this, if people wish to contact you, so you have given us details of how to find information on the menopause tool through your website. But do you have a preferred method of communication if someone wanted to reach out to you directly?
Well, my favorite place, obviously I'm busy with my business most of the time, but I check in regularly with LinkedIn. So you can find me on there, Dee Coxon on LinkedIn.
So it's just Dee Coxon, Coxon.
Yes.
And how many Dee Coxons are there on LinkedIn? Is it?
Well, not many.
Okay, so they would find you quite easily if they went searching on LinkedIn.
Yeah, actually, I think I'm down as Dee Coxon MA, which might make it easier to find.
MA, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if someone were to reach out to you through LinkedIn and mention that they'd heard this conversation on the podcast, you'd be quite happy to engage with them and see if you're able to help them in any way.
Absolutely. And if they didn't want to reach out on LinkedIn, they can email me,
Yes.
which is hello, HELLO, @menopause.com.
Excellent. Well, that sounds very easy. So yeah, thanks for making yourself so accessible. I'm sure this is something that is going to increase in visibility, and obviously the work you do is going to help that process. So look, I guess from my perspective, Dee, I really just wanted to thank you for being a guest on the show today. I guess it's not necessarily intuitive, or I wouldn't have thought for a guy, as in my case, speaking to a woman about a subject of which I don't have as much knowledge as I should. But the reason for getting you on today is to try and educate myself, and hopefully some people who might be listening in today. So, I really appreciate you handling, a fairly delicate matter in a very sort of honest and open way. And I think if people can understand that, all women, and women make up at least 50% of the population, will struggle with this in some way during the course of their lifetimes. It's obviously an imperative that we all have a better understanding of the impacts of it.
Absolutely. And would it be fair to say, Peter, that in talking to you today, I didn't make you feel uncomfortable?
No, not at all. I think it's a matter of having an open mind. 30, 40 years ago, it was unheard of for men to, for example, attend the birth of their child, and now it's common practice. And I think it's dispelling the myths that we've inherited from previous generations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, just in closing, this is Peter Crewe-Brown signing off from episode 12 of the Mind Over Matters podcast. Thanks for joining us.